After a single look at a human, the alien princess's instincts awakened. The thing about the Verath station was that it ran on rain. Not literally. The station's power came from the tidal differential of Verath Prime's twin moons, siphoned through 7 deep-bore generators that hummed at a frequency Callum Vance had stopped noticing sometime in his 3rd month. But the station had been designed by engineers from the Sorvai Collective, a species that found the sound of falling water calming, and so the corridor ceilings were lined with a network of narrow channels through which recycled gray water moved in a constant, soft patter against embedded resonance panels. Rain sounds. Everywhere. All the time. Callum had stopped noticing that too. He had stopped noticing most things. He was 31 years old, a junior cultural attaché with the Human Diplomatic Corps, and he had been posted to Verath Station for 14 months with 8 more to go. His job, in theory, was to facilitate cultural exchange and assist in the ongoing ratification talks for the Verath Compact, a multi-species trade agreement that had been in ongoing negotiation since before he was born. In practice, his job was to translate the treaty's appendices into 6 different linguistic frameworks, then retranslate the translations back, then file the retranslations with 3 separate oversight bodies who would review them in 8 to 14 standard months. The work was important. He knew it was important. He told himself it was important every morning when he sat down at his terminal, in the small office that smelled of recycled air and other people's diplomatic careers. The rain sounds followed him there too. On the morning everything changed, Callum arrived at his office at 6:32 station time, 22 minutes early, because there was nothing else to do, set a cup of synth coffee on the corner of his desk, opened the morning's dispatch queue, and read the first 3 items before realizing he had already read all of them yesterday, or something identical to them, or perhaps he was losing the ability to distinguish between days. He thought about calling home. His mother would be awake. She was always awake at strange hours now, and she liked to hear from him, and he liked hearing her voice, which still sounded like the kitchen in Leeds where he had grown up, and which was the single most opposite thing in the universe to the inside of Verath Station. But the lag was 19 minutes each way, and he had a review meeting at 900, and he couldn't afford to sit in the middle of a 38-minute round-trip conversation and still hold the emotional thread of it. He would call her tonight. He had been telling himself he would call her tonight for 6 weeks. He opened the appendix file. It was 412 pages long. He had read it 17 times. He began reading it again. At 7:14, his door beeped. He looked up. That was the first mistake, or the first gift, depending on which version of the story he told later. He had trained himself over 14 months to look up from his terminal as seldom as possible, because looking up reminded him that he was in a beige room on a space station, and that was not a thought conducive to productivity. He had, in fact, developed an impressive ability to navigate his entire morning, coffee retrieval, bathroom, corridor transit, in a state of managed non-attention. But the beep was Harvin's specific knock pattern, his Sorvai colleague who managed scheduling, and Harvin only beeped like that when there was something Callum actually needed to deal with. So Callum looked up. The door opened, and the world stopped being the way it had been. She walked in behind Harvin, which was technically the wrong word for what she did. She moved the way certain things moved that weren't designed for beige rooms, the way a storm system looked wrong under glass, or the way deep water looked wrong in a cup. She was tall, taller than Callum by nearly a head, and her skin was the color of blue deep glacier ice where it thins near the edge and the light comes through in layers. Silver hair, loose and long, catching the corridor light behind her in a way that made the beige room look even smaller. Her eyes, he noticed the eyes last, because he was human and humans notice the wrong things in the wrong order, were a pale, luminescent violet that shifted when she turned her head, The irises ringed in a thin line of gold that he would later learn was a biological marker of the Vel'shari royal line, and meant something very specific that Harvin should have warned him about. She was not young. He understood that within the first 3 seconds. There was nothing girlish about her bearing. She wore her rank and her years, and what looked like significant personal authority the way some people wear old coats, completely naturally, not noticing the weight. She was an adult woman of her species, which meant she was somewhere between 60 and 90 standard years in Vel'shari terms, which translated to roughly equivalent to late 30s in human biological terms, though he would not learn that until much later either. What he understood immediately, in the wordless way that the body sometimes understands things before the brain processes them, was that she was a person of consequence, and that she was in his office, and that she was looking at him. And she had gone absolutely, completely still. "This is Her Royal Highness Sarath Vel, 4th Princess of the Vel'shari succession," Harvin said, in his careful galactic standard that always sounded slightly apologetic. "She is attending the compact talks as part of the Vel'shari delegation. Her primary cultural liaison has developed an inner ear infection and is temporarily unable to work. Cultural attaché Vance, you have been assigned as her secondary contact for the duration of their—" "Thank you, Harvin," the princess said. Her voice it did something to the air pressure in the room. Not loudly. That was the strangest part of it. She said 2 quiet words of dismissal in accented galactic standard, and Harvin, who had worked diplomatic channels for 30 years and did not dismiss easily, made a small bow and left. The door closed. Callum was standing behind his desk, because at some point in the last 30 seconds he had stood up without consciously deciding to, which was the appropriate protocol for a dignitary entrance, and was also not something he had thought about. His body had simply done it. He was still holding his stylus. He was aware of the rain sounds in the ceiling, which he had not been aware of in approximately 4 months. The princess was still looking at him. Not the way people usually looked at him. Not even the way people usually looked at humans, with the curious detachment of someone examining an unfamiliar species, cataloging features and filing them. She was looking at him the way he would not find the right comparison for several days. She was looking at him the way you look at something that doesn't belong where you found it, like a key in a field, and you can't decide if that means someone lost it or if it was meant for you. Her jaw had tightened. Something in her shoulders had gone rigid. None of it was dramatic. She was far too composed a person for drama. But he was, by profession and training, an observer of very small signals across species lines, and he could see it. She was not okay. "Your Highness," he said, "I apologize that I wasn't briefed earlier. My name is Callum Vance." "Can I get you?" He stopped, because he had been about to offer her synth coffee out of reflex, which was definitely the wrong gesture for a Vel'shari royal, and he had caught himself in time. "Would you like to sit?" She looked at the chair on the other side of his desk. It was a standard-issue diplomatic office chair, gray, mildly padded, thoroughly unremarkable. She sat in it with the posture of someone who had sat in thrones, which made the chair look smaller. She folded her hands on the desk. She looked at him again. "Attaché Vance," she said carefully, "are you familiar with the concept of the Vel'shari Sevkara?" He was not. He said so. "It translates imprecisely," she said. "The closest equivalent in your records would be a recognition response. A biological imperative." She paused. He could see her choosing words with very great care. "Among the Vel'shari, there exists a genetic inheritance from our precontact ancestry. When an individual of the royal succession encounters a compatible presence, their body recognizes it before the mind has any opportunity to evaluate, categorize, or refuse." Callum stood very still. "It is considered," she continued, "deeply inconvenient." "I see," he said. "It has not," she said, and her voice had developed an edge that sounded like someone trying to maintain composure through an experience they found professionally embarrassing. In recorded Vel'shari history, responded to a member of an off-world species. There are precisely no protocols for this situation. I want to be fully transparent with you regarding that. He looked at her. She was watching him with those shifting violet eyes, and there was something underneath the composure that he recognized, not attraction exactly, though that was part of it, but the specific look of someone who has just had something happen to them that they did not plan and are not sure what to do with. He had seen it in his own mirror once, about 6 years ago, in a train station in Edinburgh. He sat down. "What does it feel like?" he asked, "if you're comfortable answering." The question surprised her. He could see it, the very small shift in her expression, the loosening of something around her eyes. She had clearly prepared herself for a range of responses. This had not been one of them. "Like standing at the edge of something very high," she said, "and knowing that the ground below is sound, but not knowing that from logic, knowing it from somewhere else." He was quiet for a moment. The rain sounds moved through the ceiling. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "I mean okay," he said again. "I don't know what this means or what you need or what the right thing to do is, but I'm not alarmed. And I'm not," he thought about how to say it. "You came here and told me the truth, which is a significant thing to do, and I'd like to respond to that in kind, so here is my truth. I noticed you when you walked in. I don't know what that means either, but I think we should probably figure it out together, rather than separately." She was quiet for a long time. "Your species," she said finally, "has a significant literature around the concept of recognizing something important before you understand it. We call it a lot of things," he said. "Gut feeling, love at first sight, the thing you know in your bones." "Yes," she said softly, "exactly that." What followed was 3 days of careful, professional, deliberate avoidance. Not deliberate avoidance of each other. They couldn't manage that, because Callum was now her assigned cultural liaison, and that meant they had 2 joint sessions per day, with the compact working groups plus whatever ad hoc consultations arose from the treaty language revisions. They avoided, instead, the thing that had happened in his office. They circled it the way people circle a fire when they're not sure yet whether they want to warm themselves or risk getting burned. He learned things about her in those 3 days, the way you learn things about a country by walking through it slowly. Her name was Sarathvel, and the second part was a dynastic suffix, and her given name was Sarath, and she did not invite him to use it. She was the 4th of 7 royal siblings, which in Vel'shari succession law meant she had significant freedom, enough to travel, to sit on delegations, to conduct her own affairs, without the full ceremonial weight of direct heirship. She had spent 40 standard years in diplomatic work before this posting, which meant she was a professional in the same sense that Callum was a professional, except that her scope was galactic treaty architecture, and his was appendix translation. She was brilliant in a specific, unsettling way. She could hold the entire structural logic of the compact negotiation in her head and tell you, without notes, how a change on page 214 would affect the interpretation of Clause 7C in the Master Framework. The Sorvi delegates deferred to her. The Methcore delegates, who deferred to no one, at least listened when she spoke. She spoke carefully. She never said anything she didn't mean. She asked questions that were the right questions, and she waited for full answers, and she did not fill silence with noise. Callum, who had spent 14 months in managed non-attention, found himself paying attention again. He also found himself waking earlier in the morning, not from anxiety, from something else, the mild, unsettling energy of a person who has something to look forward to and doesn't quite know what to do with that feeling after a long absence of it. The working group sessions were, in theory, the part of his day that belonged to the professional arrangement and nothing else. In practice, they became the part of his day he spent the most carefully. There were 11 delegates in the main compact working table at any given time. 4 Vel'shari, 3 Sorvai, 2 Methkor, 1 Hesh observer who had not spoken voluntarily in 6 months but who took notes with extraordinary speed, and Callum as the human core cultural liaison, which gave humanity exactly 1 seat at a table where they were, in the grand calculus of galactic treaty architecture, a junior signatory. He had known this for 14 months and had made peace with it by concentrating on the appendices. Now he concentrated on Sarath and through her on the room. What he saw, watching her work, was that she moved through the session the way water moves through terrain, not by force, but by finding the path. When the Methkor delegates raised their objection about the transit rights clause for the 14th time, she did not argue back directly. She restated their concern in 3 different frameworks, each one progressively closer to what they actually wanted to say but hadn't quite found the language for. And by the 3rd restatement, the senior Methkor delegate was nodding slowly, and the objection had transformed into a proposed amendment that everyone could actually work with. It took 11 minutes. No one else in the room could have done it in 11 days. During a break on the 2nd day, the Vel'shari legal coordinator, a formal young official named Esithran who wore her rank in her posture and had not, as far as Callum could tell, ever smiled in a professional setting, appeared at Callum's elbow. Her Royal Highness handles the transit sessions with impressive efficiency, Callum said, because it was true and because it was the appropriate kind of thing to say. Esithran looked at him with the expression of someone who has been asked to address an unexpected category of problem. She does, she said carefully. She always has. Her record in treaty facilitation is a pause. It is extraordinary by any measure. I can see that. The reason I mention it, Esithran said, in the careful way of someone who had been given a message to deliver and was delivering it, is that Her Royal Highness's record has been built over 40 standard years of sustained professional focus. That focus has been, historically, her primary characteristic. Among the delegation, her ability to remain unaffected by extraneous considerations has been something we have depended upon. Callum translated this without difficulty. You're concerned, he said. I am noting, Esithran said precisely, that the Sevkara in the historical cases I have reviewed caused significant disruption to the party who experienced it. That Her Royal Highness appears to be functioning normally, professionally, diplomatically, is a positive indicator. We would not wish for anything to interrupt that. Neither would I, Callum said. Esithran studied him. She had, he noticed, the same quality of careful observation that Sarath possessed, though in a more narrow-bore and less intuitive way. You are junior, she said. Not dismissively, she said it like a statement of architecture, like noting that a certain wall bears less weight than others. I know, he said. Human Core Appendix Translations Junior Posting 14 months in, I'm aware. And yet you are, she paused again, present in a way that is unusual for your rank. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 14 months not being present, he said. I've been making up for it. Esithran looked at him for a long moment longer, with the expression of someone recalculating a sum. Then she inclined her head slightly and walked away, which he took as a cautious endorsement or at least a temporary suspension of concern. He would later learn that she had gone directly to Sarath and reported the conversation verbatim, and that Sarath had said, very precisely, "He is exactly what he appears to be. That is rare enough that I think we should consider it a point in his favor, not a source of concern." He would learn this from Sarath, who told him because she thought he deserved to know how he had been evaluated, and who said it without apology and without softening, because she did not do those things with information she respected. He had thought for a long time that what he needed from this posting was to get through it, to log the months and translate the appendices and return to Earth with his record intact and a posting under his belt that he could build from. He had not expected to find, in the middle of all the managed non-attention, a reason to be entirely and specifically alive in the present moment. And yet, on the evening of the third day, he was in the station's common observation corridor, a long, curved gallery with a floor-to-ceiling viewport looking out over the gas nebula approaches to Verath Prime, eating a very mediocre dinner from the station cafeteria and telling himself he was just there to see the stars. He was absolutely just there to see the stars. He had been just there to see the stars for 45 minutes. The observation corridor was one of Verath Station's genuine aesthetic achievements. The rest of the station ran to the same beige and gray institutional palette of every diplomatic posting Callum had ever been on, but someone, a Sci-Fi architect with strong opinions, he suspected, had insisted that the common corridor face the nebula directly, and that the viewport glass be floor-to-ceiling and uninterrupted, and that the lighting in the gallery be kept low enough to see by without washing out the view. The gas nebula beyond was a structure of extraordinary color, golds and deep reds, and a specific shade of violet that Callum had started noticing in other places since the morning he'd first registered the matching shade in Sarath's eyes. The nearer moon turned in its orbit against the nebula's edge, slow and gray and patient, and Callum had been staring at it long enough that his cafeteria food had gone cold. He heard her before he saw her, the soft sound of Vel'shari footsteps, which were lighter than they should have been for her height, and the particular quality of silence that followed her like an atmosphere. He did not turn around. She sat beside him, not across from him, not at a careful diplomatic distance. Beside him, close enough that he could see, peripherally, the way the nebula light caught the blue layer depth of her skin and found things in it, striations of deeper color, like the interior of glacier ice seen from inside, which he had not been close enough to see before. They looked at the stars. "I contacted my court historian today," she said. "What did they say?" "That the Sevkara has 3 recorded cases of responding across species lines. All 3 were in the early colonial period, when Vel'shari first made contact with the Sci-Fi and the Meth Corps. The cases are considered," she paused, "historical curiosities. There are no protocols because the assumption was that early contact anomalies would not recur. But they have. Apparently." He watched a gas tendril move across the face of the nearer moon. "Does it go away if you ignore it?" "No," she said. "The records are clear on that. It compounds." He thought about that. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is," she said, "extremely." "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She said it with a specificity that stopped him. "Don't apologize for existing in a way that happened to produce this in me. That would be," she looked at him. The violet of her eyes had settled into something steadier tonight, warmer, the gold rings catching the nebula's edge. "That would be as if I apologized to rain for making things wet." He had not expected that from her, and he laughed, a real short laugh, not the diplomatic kind. She watched it happen with an expression he had not seen on her face before, surprised and pleased by being surprised. "Your laugh," she said. "What about it?" "It's different from your diplomatic voice. I wondered what it sounded like." He turned to look at her properly, which he had been carefully not doing, and she was looking at him with the same directness she brought to everything. But underneath it now was something he recognized from the first morning, that quality of a person standing at the edge of something high, knowing the ground below was sound. "Sarath," he said. He had not been invited to use her name. He saw the moment the word landed, the way she went still, the small catch of breath she suppressed. "You're allowed to use it," she said. "I should have said earlier I was," she considered, "managing." "I know, I was managing too." They were quiet. The gas nebula turned slowly. The rain sounds were faint here, half absorbed by the thickness of the viewport glass, and the silence that filled in around them was the kind of silence that only exists between people who have stopped needing to fill it. He was aware of the cold of his cafeteria food beside him and did not reach for it. "What happens now?" he asked. He meant it genuinely, not as a romantic question, though it was that too, but as a practical one. What did the Sevkara require? What did the Vel'shari court say? What were the actual parameters of the thing he appeared to have stumbled into? "That is an excellent question," she said, "and the honest answer is that I don't fully know." "Can you live with not fully knowing?" She looked at him. "Can you?" "I've been not fully knowing things for 14 months, he said. "I've gotten very good at it." "The difference," she said quietly, "is that this particular not knowing has a direction. It's moving towards something, not spinning in place." That landed in him somewhere under his sternum, which he noted and did not comment on. "Yes," he said, "it does." He made 3 mistakes in the following weeks. He cataloged them honestly because he was that kind of person. The first was that he sent an inquiry to the Human Core Cultural Database about Vel'shari bonding practices and didn't think to do it through a private channel. Harvin, who was not malicious but was constitutionally interested in everything, noticed the query flag and mentioned it to 3 people before noon. By dinner, it had reached the Vel'shari delegation's administrative coordinator, a narrow-eyed official named Prethsan who had been watching the human attaché, and the 4th princess with increasing professional concern. The second was that he told Sarath about it immediately, which was the right thing to do, but which also confirmed to Prethsan's subsequent inquiry that something real was occurring, and not merely imagined. The third was falling asleep in the compact working session on the afternoon of the 19th day, which was not related to Sarath, except that he had been awake until 300 talking with her in the observation corridor, and his body had finally extracted payment. He woke to 12 pairs of alien eyes watching him with varying degrees of amusement and censure, and to Sarath's voice, level and unreadable, saying, "Attaché Vance has been working extended hours on the appendix revisions. I believe we can proceed without him for this portion." She had covered for him. In front of 11 delegates and 2 administrative coordinators, the 4th princess of the Vel'shari succession had smoothly, calmly, without apparent embarrassment, covered for the junior human attaché who had fallen asleep at the table. He found her in the corridor after the session. "Thank you," he said. "Don't mention it," she said, and then, "Literally, please don't mention it to anyone. My court historian is already composing a monograph." He bit down on a smile. She watched the effort. "You're not very good at hiding that," she said. The smile. "I've been told." "I find I don't mind it," she said. "I mention this because I am aware that I don't often communicate what I find, and I am attempting to improve." He stopped walking. She stopped a half step later and looked back at him. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Communicate differently, I mean, for me. I can learn your register." She studied him. "You think it's easier for you to adjust than for me?" "I think I've got 8 more months on this station with a lot of working hours and I'm a professional translator," he said. "Learning registers is what I do, and I think—" He was aware that he was moving onto ground he had been approaching for 3 weeks and had not quite stepped onto. "I think what you communicate when you communicate it is worth learning to read." She was quiet, not the managed quiet of the first day, the kind that was working to contain something, but a different quiet, the kind that was simply present. "Callum," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name without the title. He felt it land with the same force he imagined she'd felt when he'd said hers. "Yes," he said. "I need you to understand something. The Sevkara is," she chose words. "It's not a command. It's not an obligation. It doesn't require anything of you that you don't choose freely. The Vel'shari have had centuries of legal framework built around the fact that it appears in only one party and not always the other, and the law is unambiguous. The response belongs to the person who experiences it. It is not a claim on anyone else." He looked at her. "I know. I want to be sure. Sarath, he kept his voice even, I know. But I also think you should know, he paused, because what came next was the truest thing he'd said in 14 months, possibly longer, and he wanted to say it correctly. I also think you should know that what's happening on my side isn't nothing. I didn't have a name for it. I still don't have your name for it, but it's not nothing. The gold rings around her violet irises brightened almost imperceptibly in the corridor light. He had noticed, over the past weeks, that they did this when she was feeling something specific, not all emotions, just the ones she didn't suppress. I know, she said softly. Okay then. Okay, she agreed. They stood in the corridor with the rain sounds moving overhead, which neither of them was not noticing anymore. Prethsan called a formal inquiry on the 26th day. It was framed, carefully, as a review of liaison assignment protocols, whether the human attaché's role as Her Royal Highness's cultural contact represented a conflict of interest given the ongoing ratification talks. Callum learned about it 2 hours before it convened, from Harvin, who delivered the news with the apologetic efficiency of someone who considered this situation entirely not his fault. Callum spent one of those 2 hours reviewing every piece of Vel'shari court protocol he could access in the station's database. He spent the second hour talking to Sarath. You don't need to be there, she said. They were standing in her suite, which was larger and better appointed than his office, and still managed to look somewhat small around her. This is a Vel'shari internal matter. Prethsan can only raise it as a cultural protocol question, not a diplomatic one. I know, he said, but I want to be there. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because you told me the truth on the first day, in my office. You sat down and you told me something deeply personal and professionally complicated without knowing how I would respond. And you did it because you thought I deserved the truth. He paused. I can sit in a protocol review for 2 hours. She was quiet for a moment. The gold, she said finally, in your species' eyes you don't have it. But there are other ways a body announces things, and I have learned to read yours. What is mine announcing? That you are decided, she said, and that you have been for some time. He didn't argue with that. The protocol review convened in the Vel'shari delegation's formal chamber, which was a room of dark stoneweave panels and low amber light that made everyone look like they were in an old portrait. Prethsan sat at the head of the table with 2 administrative officials and a cultural ethics officer. Sarath sat to one side, composed as stone, with the delegation's legal coordinator beside her. Callum sat 3 seats down as an observer, which was as close as he was permitted, and he kept his hands loose on the table and his face professionally neutral. Prethsan laid out the concern in careful, practiced language. The integrity of the compact talks required that all liaison relationships be free of personal entanglement. The cultural ethics framework of the Vel'shari collective required that the Sevkara, when it arose, be disclosed immediately to court authorities. Disclosure had been. Disclosure was made to me immediately, Callum said. Prethsan looked at him. Her Royal Highness disclosed the Sevkara to me on the first morning of our professional contact, he said, in my office, before she was required to, under your framework, and before I was aware that any such requirement existed. He kept his voice even. She disclosed it because she determined it was ethically necessary. That is the nature of her character. I would ask that the protocol review take that decision into account. Prethsan was quiet for a moment. The cultural ethics officer made a note. The concern, Prethsan said carefully, is not the disclosure. The concern is the nature of the situation itself. The Sevkara responding to a non-Vel'shari individual is unprecedented, Callum said. I know, Her Highness's court historian is aware. The compact working group is unaffected because Her Highness's professional conduct has been, as anyone at this table can confirm, beyond reproach. He paused. The situation is unusual. It is not improper. Those are different things. Sareth was not looking at him. She was looking at the table, and her expression was entirely composed, and the gold rings around her irises were very bright. The protocol review continued for another 40 minutes and resolved into a monitoring period, an agreement that Prethsan would conduct quarterly check-ins on the liaison arrangement, and that both parties would maintain full documentation of their professional interactions. It was, as these things went, a relatively mild outcome. Afterward in the corridor, Sareth said, "You didn't have to speak." "I know. The monitoring period is." "Fine," he said. "Quarterly check-ins. I can manage quarterly check-ins." She looked at him. The gold was still bright. "You spoke for me," she said. "You spoke for me when I fell asleep in the working session," he pointed out, "and you did it in front of more people." Something happened in her face, not quite a smile, because he had come to understand that she did not smile easily, that a smile was a significant gift from her, not a social reflex. But the thing that happened was in the neighborhood of a smile, which he had learned to catalog alongside the gold ring brightness and the particular quality of her stillness when she was holding onto something. "Callum," she said. "Yes. I would like, at some point, to know what your kitchen smells like." He blinked. "Your home," she clarified. "You think about it sometimes during sessions, I have noticed. I would like to know what it is." It took him a moment to understand what she was saying. Not just the words, but the architecture of the sentence, the distance it proposed, and the direction it implied. "Leeds," he said. "My mother's kitchen. It smells like," he thought about it honestly. "Tea mostly, very strong tea, always brewing. And whatever she's making, which is usually something that takes all day, and something else I don't have a word for except home." "I would like to smell that someday," she said simply, "if you would like to show it to me." He was aware that this was significant. He was aware that the Vel'shari did not speak carelessly about futures. He was aware that she was not speaking carefully about a future she expected to be distant. "I would like that very much," he said. The rest of the posting unspooled in a different way than the first 14 months had. Not dramatically, not in the way of old stories where love rewrites the landscape. He still translated appendices. The rain sound still moved through the corridor ceilings. The compact talk still proceeded at the pace of continental drift. But he was paying attention now. He noticed the way she held a stylus differently than any other species at the table, with 2 fingers and a thumb, and the way it produced a distinctive left lean in her written galactic standard. He noticed that she ate very little at formal sessions, and significantly more when it was just the 2 of them reviewing documents, which he interpreted as either a sign that formality suppressed her appetite or that he made her comfortable enough to have one, and he was quietly and unreasonably pleased by the second possibility. He noticed that she had a sense of humor that was so dry it was almost undetectable, deployed rarely and always at moments, when formality had gotten heavy enough to need a small release valve. He noticed, gradually, that the working sessions themselves had changed in texture. Not in their content. The compact talks ground on with their usual architectural complexity, and Sareth's conduct within them was as precise and professional as it had always been. But there was something in the quality of her attention during breaks, in the moments between formal agenda items when the room dissolved briefly into side conversations and the shuffling of documents, that had a different character than it had had in the first weeks. She was less managed. Not unprofessional, never that, but there was less of the very careful, very deliberate containment in her peripheral attention, the sense that she was spending energy on keeping something still. He mentioned this to no one. He was not certain enough of what he was observing to name it out loud, and besides, there was a version of professional discretion that felt right and a version that felt like hoarding, and he was trying to stay on the right side of that line. What he did do was return her quality of attention. He stopped managing his own non-attention and simply let himself be present in the sessions, which turned out to make him significantly better at his job. He caught translation nuances he had been scrolling past for months. He caught an ambiguity in the Meth Corps' formal objection language on the transit rights clause that, when he noted it to Sarath before the afternoon session, led to a reframing of the clause that the Meth Corps senior delegate actually accepted. "Good catch," Sarath said after the session in the corridor outside. "I've been paying attention," he said. She looked at him with the slight pause that he had learned meant she was deciding how direct to be. "So have I," she said. She noticed things about him too, and she told him what she noticed, carefully and selectively, in the way she did everything. "You use your hands differently when you're explaining something you care about," she said one evening, in the observation corridor that had become, without either of them formally declaring it so, their regular late-evening location. "Do I?" "They become more active. When you were explaining the compact's environmental rider this morning, you were barely moving. When you explained the transit rights implications last week, your hands were," she paused, visibly considering. "It was like watching someone think with their whole body." "You watch me in sessions," he said. "I watch everyone in sessions, it's part of the work." A pause. "I watch you more." That was the most direct thing she had said to him, and he felt it register in the same place under his sternum that several of her sentences had registered now, which was becoming its own kind of map of her. He had started privately to chart it. The things she said that landed there, the moments when the gold in her irises brightened, the particular quality of her silences when they were content ones rather than managing ones. He did not do this with analytical detachment. He did it the way you learn a language that you intend to speak for a long time. "Sarath," he said. "Yes. I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me if it crosses a line I don't know about yet." "Ask." "Do you want to have dinner?" He kept his voice simple. "Not in the observation corridor with station cafeteria food. An actual dinner. I can request a provisional kitchen access from the station managers. They have a diplomatic entertaining suite. I can cook something." She considered this for a longer moment than most questions required. He waited. He had learned to wait with her, to let her thinking happen at its natural speed rather than filling the space. It was one of the things he had most changed in himself over these weeks, the human tendency to interpret silence as discomfort and fill it with words. With Sarath, silence was not discomfort. It was how she showed respect for a question. "The Sevkara requires," she stopped, started again. "What the Sevkara does in practice is tell me that you are a right presence. That my body has evaluated you on some level below cognition and found you," she looked for words. "Sound, the word I used before, sound ground." "Yes." "What it doesn't tell me," she said, "is what I want. Those are separate questions." "I know," he said, "so what do you want?" She looked at him. "Dinner," she said. "Yes, and I would like you to tell me what the tea in Leeds tastes like while we eat it." The dinner was on the 41st day of her posting. He had 3 hours with the diplomatic suite kitchen, and he used them. He could cook, his mother had made sure of that, on the principle that people who can't feed themselves are always slightly at the mercy of the world, and he made things he remembered. A soup with vegetables that translated to the nearest Vel'shari safe equivalents the station stores carried, bread from scratch that took almost the full 3 hours and was the project he cared most about getting right. Tea, obviously. Very strong tea. He found something in the station's supplies that was not quite what he needed, but was close enough to remind him of the real thing, which he supposed was, as much as he could ask for from a station 17 light years from Yorkshire. She arrived at the precise time he'd specified, which he had expected. She looked at the table. "You cooked," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the statement of someone confirming that the unexpected thing is actually occurring. "Trying to give you the experience in advance," he said, since we can't get to Leeds yet. Yet, he heard himself say it and did not unsay it. She sat across from him, which was the chair he had set for her, and she looked at the bread he had put in the center of the table. It had come out well, browning evenly, with a crust that had cracked just the way he'd hoped, and at the soup, which was dark and fragrant and which he had quietly decided was the best thing he'd managed to cook on any station anywhere, and at the cup of tea beside her plate. "This is a domestic ritual," she said, "sharing food prepared specifically for someone." "For humans, yes." He sat down. "It's one of our oldest ways of saying a lot of things, depending on who's cooking and who's at the table." "What are you saying?" He met her eyes. "That I'm glad you're here, that I think you're worth the 3 hours, that—" He stopped. "That I've been not noticing things for 14 months and I notice everything now." The gold rings were very bright. "I would like to try the bread first," she said. "Please." She broke a piece of bread the way she did everything, with complete attention, without rushing. He watched her face while she ate it and she let him watch. "It's good," she said. It sounded like she was surprised. "Good surprised or?" "Good as in, it tastes like something made for a specific person," she said. "Not like station food, which tastes like something designed to sustain any person. This tastes like it knows who it's for." He sat with that for a moment. "Then you understand why I make it instead of buying it," he said. "Yes." She drank the tea. He watched her process the flavor, the slight widening of her eyes, the small exhale, the way she held the cup in both hands after. "This is very strong. It's how my mother makes it." "I think I will like your mother," she said. She said it simply, the way she said everything that mattered, without decoration, without softening, as if the truth needed no frame. He felt something settle in him, quiet and certain, like a compass finding north. They ate, they talked. Not about the compact, not about protocols or monitoring periods or court historians composing monographs. They talked about what they had both done before this station, her 40 years of treaty work, the postings she had found beautiful and the ones she had found unbearable, the specific quality of loneliness that long diplomatic service produced in a person who was also, fundamentally, a person who preferred home. He talked about translating, about the strange intimacy of finding the right word in another language for something that your own language says wrong, about why he had chosen this work even when it felt like appendices and retranslations, and managed non-attention for months at a stretch. She told him about the first treaty she had ever sat at the table for, at what translated to approximately age 24 in human terms, when she had been the most junior member of a Vel'shari delegation to a Sorvai system use dispute, and had said nothing for 3 days because she had not been authorized to speak, and had simply listened until she understood the room better than anyone in it. "On the 4th day," she said, "the lead negotiator asked me what I thought. And I told him the precise amendment that would resolve the impasse. He stared at me for a long time, and then he wrote it down exactly as I had said it." "Did it work?" "It was ratified 6 weeks later," she said. "He told my court it had been his own insight." I did not correct him. "Why not?" She considered the question genuinely, the way she considered all genuine questions. "Because getting the amendment ratified mattered more than the credit for it," she said. "The credit was a different problem to solve in a different session. The amendment was immediate." He thought about this. "You were 24. 24 and extremely careful about where I spent my energy," she said. "I have become somewhat less careful over the decades. I have found it less necessary. Because you've earned enough credibility that you don't have to manage it that tightly. Because I have learned which rooms will listen and which rooms are performing listening," she said. "The first kind are worth careful management. The second kind are not worth the energy, and I have stopped wasting it on them." He filed this alongside everything else he was accumulating about her. The way she prioritized truth over performance, the way she had spent 40 years learning the difference between the two, the way that decades of that kind of work had not made her cynical but had made her selective. He thought of the first morning again, the way she had sat down across from him in his beige office and told him the truth immediately because she had determined it was necessary. He thought about what kind of person did that, in what kind of world, after how many years of watching people not do it. Because sometimes, he said, returning to the thread they'd been on before, you find the word, the exact right word. And the thing that was untranslatable becomes transferable. Something that existed in one mind and one language exists in another. She looked at him. Yes, she said, that is exactly what I do also. I just do it for legal architecture instead of language. Same thing, he said. Yes, she said and smiled. He had not seen her smile before, not the full thing. He had seen the approach, the neighborhood of it, the thing that was almost smile and nearly smile and held back smile. This was the real version, and it changed her face the way good light changes a room, not by adding anything that wasn't there, but by making visible what had been present all along. It was the smile of someone who had found, in an unexpected place, the rarest kind of company, someone who understood what they were saying. He did not say anything for a moment, because anything he said would be insufficient. You're staring, she said. I'm noticing, he corrected, it's different. How? Staring is what you do when something's in front of you, he said. Noticing is what you do when it matters. She held his gaze for a long time. The gold around her irises brightened steadily, not in a quick flash but in the slow, sure way that light strengthens as the source comes closer. I am going to tell you something, she said. I want you to know that it is considered that the Vel'shari do not say this lightly. That there are words in our language for this that take years to say and other words that are said once and permanently. She paused. I will not say either of those words yet, but I want you to know that what happened on the first morning when I walked into your office and my body understood something my mind hadn't caught up with yet, it was not a mistake. I understand that now. It was not an anomaly. It was, she stopped. Recognition, he said. Yes, she said, exactly that. The rain sounds moved through the walls of the diplomatic suite, faint through the insulation. The nebula light came through the small viewport above the counter and lay across the table in a bar of cool blue, and across her hands, and across the bread between them. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand. She put hers in it. Her hand was different from his, longer fingers, cooler skin, a texture at the wrist where the layered blue depth of her coloring was most visible, like water you could see through to something older and deeper below. He held it carefully, aware of the weight of it, aware that she had chosen this. We have 3.5 more months, he said. After which the compact talks move to Vel'shari Prime for ratification, she said, which will require additional cultural liaison support. I could put in a transfer request. I have, she said quietly, already spoken with your core director about the possibility, informally, hypothetically. He looked at her. I told you, she said, the Sevkara moves toward something. It doesn't spin in place. I know, he said, I've been moving toward it too. She turned her hand in his, not to pull away but to hold more deliberately. The ground is sound, she said. It was a statement, not a question. The ground is very sound, he said. They stayed at the table as the station's artificial night deepened outside the viewport, and the nebula turned its slow, ancient turn, and the rain sounds went on overhead, and neither of them was not noticing anything. On the morning the Vel'shari delegation completed its work and prepared for departure, Callum filed 3 documents in the same hour. The first was his completed translation of the compact's environmental rider, all 412 pages of the appendix rendered into 6 linguistic frameworks, each cross-checked and certified, the work of 14 months done in full. He had been dreading the final review pass for weeks, finding it difficult to hold his attention on it, not because the work had become less important, but because he had been spending his available attention on things that felt more immediately alive. He sat down with it the evening before departure and found, to his surprise, that it was good, better than good. There were 12 places in the Vel'shari linguistic framework he had gotten wrong in earlier drafts and corrected, not because he had known they were wrong, but because he had, apparently, absorbed enough of how Sarath said things and thought things over 6 weeks that his ear had adjusted. He filed it with a note that it had been reviewed to a higher standard than required, which was a thing he had never had occasion to write before. The second was his formal request for transfer to Vel'shari Prime to assist with the ratification phase of the compact talks. His core director, who had been briefed informally by a certain fourth princess, and who was significantly more perceptive than people usually assumed, approved the request before noon. There was a one-line addition at the bottom of the approval message. We expect thorough documentation of any additional cross-species cultural exchange that occurs during this posting. He read it twice and decided it was a joke. He replied with a formal acknowledgement that contained no jokes because he was a professional. The third was a message to his mother in Leeds. It was long. It covered more or less honestly the last several weeks, the protocol review, the diplomatic sweet kitchen, the bread, the tea, the things that words in one language did not quite cover, and the thing he was moving toward and why he thought it was sound. He told her about the Sevkara, which he tried to explain accurately and fairly and was not sure he managed. He told her about the gold in Sarath's eyes when she laughed, which he was better at describing. He said, "I know this is unexpected. I didn't plan it, but I think you would understand it if you met her, which I think is going to happen." He sent it before he could revise it into something more cautious. He did not know yet what words the Vel'shari had for what this was and what it was becoming. He knew they had several, and that some took years and some were permanent, and that all of them mattered. He knew the Vel'shari did not say permanent things casually. He knew that Sarath, in particular, did not say anything casually. He found, thinking about this, that he was not frightened by it. He found that permanent things, when approached from this direction, with this person, did not feel like cages but like commitments. The kind that people made when they understood clearly what they were committing to and had chosen it rather than fallen into it. He had time to learn the words. He intended to learn them well. The delegation assembled at the docking bay at 1400 station time. He was there in his professional capacity, to see them off, which was his job. The Sorvai delegates filed past with courteous nods. The Meth Corps senior delegate stopped long enough to say, in very precise galactic standard, that the human attaché had been a more effective facilitator than anticipated. Esithran gave him a small, formal bow that contained within it the acknowledgement of a revised assessment. Prethsan walked past without looking at him, which was, under the circumstances, a form of courtesy. Sarath was the last to board, because she was always the last, because she did not rush. She stopped beside him. She did not say anything diplomatic. She had never, in his experience, said something diplomatic when something true would do. "My court historian," she said, "has titled the monograph. He tells me it is called The Anomaly of First Contact, a case study in Sevkara response across species lines. I'm flattered to be a case study. He says it will be widely read." "Even better." She looked at him. The gold in her irises was very bright, and the blue-layered depth of her skin caught the bay's cool light the same way the nebula had caught it in the observation corridor, and he was aware with the whole of his attention. The fully present, managed non-attention-ended attention he had been paying for 6 weeks. That this was a moment he would remember with exactness, the way you remember the moments that are the hinges of things. "Come to Vel'shari Prime Callum," she said. "I'll be on the next available transit," he said. She inclined her head, the small, precise movement that he had learned over the weeks, was her version of the thing that happened in his chest when she smiled. But then she added something else. She put her hand, briefly and precisely, on his forearm. Just for a moment, just long enough to be felt. Then she boarded. The bay door sealed. He stood in the docking bay for a moment longer, in the faint smell of thruster fuel and recycled air, and then he walked back to his office through corridors full of rain sounds. He sat down at his terminal. He opened the transit schedule to Vel'shari Prime, and he read every line of it with full and careful attention, cross-referencing the connection windows with his transfer approval date and the ratification timeline, working out the most efficient route. He found a transit that departed in 18 days. He filed the booking immediately. Something had awakened, in the middle of 14 months of not noticing, in a beige office with a cup of synth coffee, and a door that beeped, and a woman who had walked in and told him the truth. He was entirely sure it was not going back to sleep.